Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story.
The Wicked Prince. There once lived a prince whose heart was darker than the iron crown upon his head. From his earliest days, he dreamt not of wisdom or beauty, but of conquest. To him, the world was a board, and its people were pieces meant to fall beneath his hand. He longed to see every banner bow before his own, and every throne sink under his power. Wherever he went, the earth trembled, not with reverence, but with terror. He sent forth his armies like swarms of locusts across the fields. The sound of their march was like the crackle of fire devouring dry wood. Villages burned, their red glow staining the sky for nights unending. Crops, once heavy with grain, were trampled into dust beneath iron boots. The humble cottages of peasants, those small nests of hope, crumbled into smoke and ashes. Trees stood like blackened skeletons, their leaves licked away by the flames. Mothers fled with their children, pressing tiny faces against their hearts as if to hide them from the cruelty of men who no longer remembered they were human. Even demons, it was said, might have blushed at the deeds of those soldiers. But the prince thought it all splendid and right. This, he said, is the course of nature. The strong must rule the weak. And the world, fearful of his sword, bent to him as reeds bend before the storm. Each victory filled his coffers with gold and his heart with vanity. He built palaces of marble and halls of glass that caught the sun and cast it back in 1,000 colors. His city gleamed like a jewel in the desert, and those who came to see it whispered in awe, "What a mighty prince!" Yet none of them heard the weeping from afar, the cries rising from broken nations, from mothers who searched the ruins for their children, from rivers red with sorrow. The prince would walk alone through his treasure halls at night, his reflection glittering back from the gold piled high. "What a mighty prince," he murmured, echoing the crowd. "But I must have more, much more. Let no hand, no power, no god stand above mine." He crushed every kingdom around him. Kings who once ruled proudly now crawled behind his chariot, chained by fetters of gold. They knelt before his table and ate the crumbs that fell from his plate. And still the prince's hunger grew. Then pride whispered its final poison. he desired not only the earth, but the heavens. If priests dare deny me my image upon the altars, he declared, then I shall conquer their God as I conquered them. So he commanded the building of a marvelous ship, one that could sail through the very air. Its body shone like peacock feathers, covered with eyes that were each the mouth of a cannon. Within its heart sat the prince, surrounded by the hum of deadly invention. At the touch of a single spring, 1,000 bullets could scream forth and reload in the blink of an eye. Hundreds of eagles were yoked to the ship, and when their wings beat, the vessel rose like a flaming comet through the clouds. The earth below shrank. First, a patchwork of fields and forests, then a map, and finally, nothing but a pale blur of mist. Higher and higher he soared, until the sun itself seemed within reach. Then God sent an angel, radiant and calm, to meet the proud voyager. The prince fired his cannons, thunder without mercy, but each shot fell away, glancing harmlessly off the angel's shining wings. One drop of crimson fell from a feather and touched the ship's deck. It burned like molten iron, seared through the golden wood, and pulled the vessel downward with the weight of divine judgment. The eagles screamed, their wings tore, the air turned black with smoke. Clouds swirled and took monstrous forms, great claws and gaping maws, dragons of ash and flame. The prince, pale and trembling, clung to his throne as the ship plummeted, crashing at last among the tangled boughs of a forest, shattered and broken as his pride. Yet even then, his heart did not learn humility. I will conquer God, he cried through the ruins. I will keep my vow. 7 years he labored. He built ships greater still, forged from steel and pride. His smiths crafted spears, hard enough, he boasted, to pierce the gates of heaven. From every land he gathered soldiers until their ranks stretched farther than the eye could see. An army vast as the sea, pitiless as stone. But before he could set foot upon his terrible fleet, God sent against him not fire, not thunder, not the sword, but a single swarm of gnats. They came humming through the air like living dust, and they stung his hands, his cheeks, his proud brow. The prince, furious, drew his sword and slashed at the empty air. The gnats danced lightly, unharmed. Bring me my silks, he shouted. Wrap me in gold. Cover me so that no gnat shall reach me. His servants obeyed, layering him in costly fabrics, but one small gnat had crept beneath the folds. It found the prince's ear and stung him there. The pain burned like a flame inside his skull. Madness followed close behind. He tore at his robes, at his flesh, screaming to the heavens. His soldiers watched in horror, then in mockery, for the conqueror of nations was undone by the smallest of God's creatures. And as he danced, raving beneath the pitiless sun, his armies scattered, his ships rusted where they stood, and his name was forgotten, save in stories told to children, where they learn that pride is heavier than stone, and that even the smallest hand of heaven can strike down the mightiest man on earth. The phoenix bird in the garden of paradise, before sorrow had ever touched the wind, there grew a rose bush beneath the tree of knowledge. Its blossoms were pale as dawn and deep as flame, and in the heart of the first rose there stirred a trembling spark of life. From that sacred flower was born a bird, light as breath, radiant as the morning star. His wings caught the glow of the sun before the sun was named. His flight was like a silver lightning over the quiet dew of Eden. The angels smiled to see him rise, for his song was woven from the same harmony that bound the spheres together, a hymn without words, a melody that could make the rivers pause in their running. But then came the hour of disobedience, the fateful hand of Eve reaching toward the forbidden fruit. The air trembled. The garden fell silent. When the first bite was taken, the light of innocence was dimmed, and Adam and Eve were cast forth from the gates of paradise. As the flaming cherub drew his sword to guard the way, one single spark leapt from its edge and fell into the nest of that divine bird. The flame rose high, the leaves of the rose bush curled and darkened, and in a breath of fire, the bird was gone. Yet not all was lost. In the ashes of that holy blaze lay a single red egg, pulsing faintly with the memory of song. From it, trembling and glorious, rose a new creature, the phoenix, the only one of his kind. His feathers shimmered like molten gold. His eyes were the color of dawn, seen through tears. The legends tell that he flew eastward to Arabia, where in solitude he built his nest upon the frankincense tree. There, once in every 100 years, when the time of renewal came, he gathered spices and sweet bark around him, sang his last song to the dying sun, and surrendered himself again to the fire. Out of the crimson egg left in his ashes, a new phoenix was always born, forever alone, yet forever reborn. He is the spirit of undying beauty, the flame that never tires. Around us he flutters still, invisible but present, swift as light, clothed in every color of the heart. When a mother bends over her sleeping child, he perches unseen upon the pillow, fanning the infant's dreams with the light of heaven. When he passes through a humble room, the shadows brighten, the air grows warm, and even the violets upon the table breathe a sweeter fragrance. But the phoenix is not the bird of Arabia alone. He journeys through all the worlds of men. In the north, where the aurora shivers like living glass, he rides the green fires over Lapland's snow, leaving feathers of light upon the frozen sky. In Greenland's brief and tender summer, he hops among the yellow Arctic flowers, and his song mingles with the sighing of the ice. Beneath the copper mountains of Fabloon, where miners kneel in the glow of their lamps, he descends as a dusty moth, hovering over a worn hymn book opened on a calloused knee. Along the sacred waters of the Ganges, he drifts upon a lotus leaf, and when a Hindu maiden looks into the current and beholds his glimmer, her eyes brighten like twin stars awakening at dusk. The phoenix bird, dost thou not know him? The bird of paradise, the immortal swan of song. Through every age, he takes a different form. On the ancient stage of Thespis, he was the chattering raven that mocked and wept with the crowd, his black wings glistening with wine and sorrow. Over the frozen harp of Iceland, his beak, red as embers, swept the strings into song. On Shakespeare's shoulder, he rested in the guise of Odin's raven, whispering softly into the poet's ear the secret word, immortality. At the minstrel's feast in the halls of Wartburg, he fluttered unseen between goblet and lyre, leaving behind a spark in every verse. And dost thou not know him still? He sang for thee the song of freedom, the Marseillaise that set nations aflame, and thou kissed the pen that fell from his wing. He came to thee clothed in the radiance of paradise, but perhaps thou didst turn away, choosing instead the tinsel sparrow who chirped of trifles and fashion. Yet the phoenix waited still, patient as dawn, for his song is eternal, and his silence divine. The bird of paradise, ever reborn, ever burning, dies in flame and is renewed in flame. His painted likeness, framed in gold, adorns the halls of kings, but the living bird wanders unnoticed through the streets of the poor, alighting where there is love, hope, or faith enough to receive him. Men call him a myth, a dream, a fable of Arabia. But those who listen with their hearts have heard the faint rustle of his wings at dusk, and felt the warmth of his passing in a world grown cold. For once, long ago, in the garden of paradise, beneath the tree of knowledge, and within the heart of the first rose, he was kissed by the breath of God. And in that holy moment, he was given his true name, not Phoenix, but poetry, the undying spirit that burns, perishes, and rises again in every age, in every soul that dares to dream. Aunty Toothache, where did we get this story? Would you like to know? We got it from the basket that the waste paper is thrown into. Many a good and rare book has been taken to the delicatessen store and the grocer's, not to be read, but to be used as wrapping paper for starch and coffee, beans for salted herring, butter and cheese. Used writing paper has also been found suitable. Frequently, one throws into the waste paper basket what ought not to go there. I know a grocer's assistant, the son of a delicatessen store owner. He has worked his way up from serving in the cellar to serving in the front shop. He is a well-read person, his reading consisting of the printed and written matter to be found on the paper used for wrapping. He has an interesting collection consisting of several important official documents from the waste paper baskets of busy and absent-minded officials, a few confidential letters from one lady friend to another, reports of scandal which were not to go further, not to be mentioned by a soul. He is a living salvage institution for more than a little of our literature, and his collection covers a wide field. He has the run of his parents' shop and that of his present master, and has there saved many a book, or leaves of a book, well worth reading twice. He has shown me his collection of printed and written matter from the waste paper basket, the most valued items of which have come from the delicatessen store. A couple of leaves from a large composition book lay among the collection. The unusually clear and neat handwriting attracted my attention at once. "This was written by the student," he said, "the student who lived opposite here and died about a month ago. He suffered terribly from toothache, as one can see. It is quite amusing to read. This is only a small part of what he wrote. There was a whole book, and more besides. My parents gave the student's landlady £half of green soap for it. This is what I have been able to save of it. I borrowed it, I read it, and now I tell it. The title was Aunty Toothache. Aunty gave me sweets when I was little. My teeth could stand it then. It didn't hurt them. Now I am older, am a student, and still she goes on spoiling me with sweets. She says I am a poet. I have something of the poet in me, but not enough. Often when I go walking along the city streets, it seems to me as if I am walking in a big library. The houses are the bookshelves, and every floor is a shelf with books. There stands a story of everyday life. Next to it is a good old comedy, and there are works of all scientific branches, bad literature and good reading. I can dream and philosophize among all this literature. There is something of the poet in me, but not enough. No doubt many people have just as much of it in them as I, though they do not carry a sign or a necktie with the word poet on it. They and I have been given a divine gift, a blessing great enough to satisfy oneself, but altogether too little to be portioned out again to others. It comes like a ray of sunlight and fills one's soul and thoughts. It comes like the fragrance of a flower, like a melody that one knows and yet cannot remember from where. The other evening, I sat in my room and felt an urge to read, but I had no book, no paper. Just then, a leaf, fresh and green, fell from the lime tree, and the breeze carried it in through the window to me. I examined the many veins in it. A little insect was crawling across them, as if it were making a thorough study of the leaf. This made me think of man's wisdom. We also crawl about on a leaf. Our knowledge is limited to that only, and yet we unhesitatingly deliver a lecture on the whole big tree, the root, the trunk, and the crown, the great tree comprised of God, the world, and immortality. And of all this, we know only a little leaf. As I was sitting there, I received a visit from Aunty Mila. I showed her the leaf with the insect and told her of my thoughts in connection with these. And her eyes lit up. "You are a poet," she said. "Perhaps the greatest we have. If I should live to see this, I would go to my grave gladly. Ever since the brewer Rasmussen's funeral, you have amazed me with your powerful imagination." So said Aunty Mila, and she then kissed me. Who was Aunty Mila, and who was Rasmussen the brewer? We children always called our mother's aunt Auntie. We had no other name for her. She gave us jam and sweets, although they were very injurious to our teeth. But the dear children were her weakness, she said. It was cruel to deny them a few sweets when they were so fond of them. And that's why we loved Auntie so much. She was an old maid. As far back as I can remember, she was always old. Her age never seemed to change. In earlier years, she had suffered a great deal from toothache, and she always spoke about it. And so it happened that her friend, the brewer Rasmussen, who was a great wit, called her Aunty Toothache. He had retired from the brewing business some years before, and was then living on the interest of his money. He frequently visited Auntie. He was older than she. He had no teeth at all, only a few black stumps. When a child, he had eaten too much sugar, he told us children, and that's how he came to look as he did. Auntie could surely never have eaten sugar in her childhood, for she had the most beautiful white teeth. She took great care of them, "And she did not sleep with them at night," said Rasmussen, the brewer. We children knew that this was said in malice, but Aunty said he did not mean anything by it. One morning, at the breakfast table, she told us of a terrible dream she had had during the night, in which one of her teeth had fallen out. "That means," she said, "that I shall lose a true friend." "Was it a false tooth?" asked the brewer with a chuckle. "If so, it can only mean that you will lose a false friend." "You are an insolent old man," said Aunty, angrier than I had seen her before or ever have since. She later told us that her old friend had only been teasing her. He was the finest man on earth, and when he died, he would become one of God's little angels in heaven. I thought a good deal of this transformation and wondered if I would be able to recognize him in this new character. When Aunty and he had been young, he had proposed to her. She had settled down to think it over, had thought too long, and had become an old maid, but always remained his true friend. And then Brewer Rasmussen died. He was taken to his grave in the most expensive hearse and was followed by a great number of folks, including people with orders and in uniform. Aunty stood dressed in mourning by the window, together with all of us children, except our little brother, whom the stork had brought a week before. When the hearse and the procession had passed, and the street was empty, Aunty wanted to go away from the window. But I did not want to. I was waiting for the angel, Rasmussen the brewer. Surely he had by now become one of God's bewinged little children and would appear. "Aunty," I said, "don't you think that he will come now, or that when the stork again brings us a little brother, he'll then bring us the angel Rasmussen?" Aunty was quite overwhelmed by my imagination and said, "That child will become a great poet." And this she kept repeating all the time I went to school, and even after my confirmation, and yes, still does now that I am a student. She was, and is, to me, the most sympathetic of friends, both in my poetical troubles and dental troubles, for I have attacks of both. "Just write down all your thoughts," she said, "and put them in the table drawer." That's what Jean-Paul did. He became a great poet, though I don't admire him. He does not excite one. You must be exciting. Yes, you will be exciting. The night after she said this, I lay awake, full of longings and anguish, with anxiety and fond hopes to become the great poet that Aunty saw and perceived in me. I went through all the pains of a poet, but there is an even greater pain, toothache, and it was grinding and crushing me. I became a writhing worm with a bag of herbs and a mustard plaster. "I know all about it," said Aunty. There was a sorrowful smile on her lips, and her white teeth glistened. "But I must begin a new chapter in my own and my aunt's story." 3. I had moved to a new flat and had been living there a month. I was telling Aunty about it. "I live with a quiet family. They pay no attention to me, even if I ring 3 times. Besides, it is a noisy house, full of sounds and disturbances caused by the weather, the wind, and the people. I live just above the street gate. Every carriage that drives out or in makes the pictures on the walls move about. The gate bangs and shakes the house as if there were an earthquake. If I am in bed, the shocks go right through all my limbs. But that is said to be strengthening to the nerves. If the wind blows, and it is always blowing in this country, the long window, hooks outside, swing to and fro, and strike against the wall. The bell on the gate to the neighbor's yard rings with every gust of wind. The people who live in the house come home at all hours, from late in the evening until far into the night. The lodger just above me, who in the daytime gives lessons on the trombone, comes home the latest and does not go to bed before he has taken a little midnight promenade with heavy steps and in iron-heeled shoes. There are no double windows. There is a broken pane in my room, over which the landlady has pasted some paper. But the wind blows through the crack despite that, and produces a sound similar to that of a buzzing wasp. It is like the sort of music that makes one go to sleep. If at last I fall asleep, I am soon awakened by the crowing of the cocks. From the cellarman's hen coop, the cocks and hens announce that it will soon be morning. The small ponies, which have no stable, but are tied up in the storeroom under the staircase, kick against the door and the paneling as they move about. The day dawns. The porter, who lives with his family in the attic, comes thundering down the stairs. His wooden shoes clatter. The gate bangs, and the house shakes. And when all this is over, the lodger above begins to occupy himself with gymnastic exercises. He lifts a heavy iron ball in each hand, but he is not able to hold on to them, and they are continually falling on the floor, while at the same time the young folks in the house, who are going to school, come screaming with all their might. I go to the window and open it to get some fresh air, and it is most refreshing when I can get it. And when the young woman in the back building is not washing gloves in soap suds, by which she earns her livelihood. Otherwise, it is a pleasant house, and I live with a quiet family." This was the report I gave Aunty about my flat, though it was livelier at the time, for the spoken word has a fresher sound than the written. "You are a poet," cried Aunty. "Just write down all you have said, and you will be as good as Dickens. Indeed, to me you are much more interesting. You paint when you speak. You describe your house so that one can see it. It makes one shudder. Go on with your poetry. Put some living beings into it. People, charming people, especially unhappy ones." I wrote down my description of the house as it stands, with all its sounds, its noises, but included only myself. There was no plot in it. That came later. I-4. It was during winter time, late at night, after theater hours. It was terrible weather. A snowstorm raged so that one could hardly move along. Aunty had gone to the theater, and I went there to take her home. It was difficult for one to get anywhere, to say nothing of helping another. All the hiring carriages were engaged. Aunty lived in a distant section of the town, while my dwelling was close to the theater. Had this not been the case, we would have had to take refuge in a sentry box for a while. We trudged along in the deep snow, while the snowflakes whirled around us. I had to lift her, hold on to her, and push her along. Only twice did we fall, but we fell on the soft snow. We reached my gate, where we shook some of the snow from ourselves. On the stairs, too, we shook some off. And yet there was still enough, almost to cover the floor of the anteroom. We took off our overcoats and boots, and what other clothes might be removed. The landlady lent Aunty dry stockings and a nightcap. "This she would need," said the landlady, and added that it would be impossible for my aunt to get home that night, which was true. Then she asked Aunty to make use of her parlor, where she would prepare a bed for her on the sofa, in front of the door that led into my room, and that was always kept locked. And so she stayed. The fire burned in my stove, the tea urn was placed on the table, and the little room became cozy, if not as cozy as Auntie's own room, where in the winter-time there are heavy curtains before the door, heavy curtains before the windows, and double carpets on the floor, with 3 layers of thick paper underneath. One sits there, as if in a well-corked bottle, full of warm air. Still, as I have said, it was also cozy at my place, while outside the wind was whistling. Aunty talked and reminisced. She recalled the days of her youth. The brewer came back. Many old memories were revived. She could remember the time I got my first tooth, and the family's delight over it. My first tooth. The tooth of innocence, shining like a little drop of milk. The milk tooth When one had come, several more came, a whole rank of them, side by side, appearing both above and below. The finest of children's teeth, though these were only the vanguard, not the real teeth, which have to last one's whole lifetime. Then those also appeared, and the wisdom teeth as well, the flank men of each rank, born in pain and great tribulation. They disappear too, sometimes every one of them. They disappear before their time of service is up, and when the very last one goes, that is far from a happy day. It is a day for mourning. And so then, one considers himself old, even if he feels young. Such thoughts and talk are not pleasant. Yet we came to talk about all this. We went back to the days of my childhood and talked and talked. It was 12 o'clock before Aunty went to rest in the room nearby. "Good night, my sweet child," she called. "I shall now sleep as if I were in my own bed." And she slept peacefully. But otherwise, there was no peace either in the house or outside. The storm rattled the windows, struck the long, dangling iron hooks against the house, and rang the neighbor's backyard bell. The lodger upstairs had come home. He was still taking his little nightly tour up and down the room. He then kicked off his boots and went to bed and to sleep. But he snores so that anyone with good ears can hear him through the ceiling. I found no rest, no peace. The weather did not rest either. It was lively. The wind howled and sang in its own way. My teeth also began to be lively, and they hummed and sang in their way. An awful toothache was coming on. There was a draught from the window. The moon shone in upon the floor. The light came and went, as the clouds came and went in the stormy weather. There was a restless change of light and shadow, but at last the shadow on the floor began to take shape. I stared at the moving form and felt an icy cold wind against my face. On the floor sat a figure, thin and long, like something a child would draw with a pencil on a slate. Something supposed to look like a person. A single thin line forming the body. Another 2 lines the arms, each leg being but a single line, and the head having a polygonal shape. The figure soon became more distinct. It had a very thin, very fine sort of cloth draped around it, clearly showing that the figure was that of a female. I heard a buzzing sound. Was it she, or the wind which was buzzing like a hornet through the crack in the pane? No, it was she, Madame Toothache herself. Her terrible highness, Satania Infernalis. God deliver and preserve us from her. It is good to be here. she buzzed. These are nice quarters. Mossy ground, fenny ground. Gnats have been buzzing around here with poison in their stings. And now I am here with such a sting. It must be sharpened on human teeth. Those belonging to the fellow in bed here shine so brightly. They have defied sweet and sour things, heat and cold, nutshells and plum stones. But I shall shake them, make them quake, feed their roots with drafty winds, and give them cold feet. That was a frightening speech. She was a terrible visitor. So you are a poet, she said. Well, I'll make you well versed in all the poetry of toothache. I'll thrust iron and steel into your body. I'll seize all the fibers of your nerves. I then felt as if a red-hot awl were being driven into my jawbone. I writhed and twisted. A splendid set of teeth, she said, just like an organ to play upon. We shall have a grand concert with Jews' harps, kettle drums and trumpets, piccolo flute, and a trombone in the wisdom tooth. Grand poet, grand music. And then she started to play. She looked terrible, even if one did not see more of her than her hand, the shadowy, gray, ice-cold hand with the long, thin, pointed fingers. Each of them was an instrument of torture. The thumb and the forefinger were the pincers and wrench. The middle finger ended in a pointed awl. The ring finger was a drill, and the little finger squirted gnat's poison. I am going to teach you meter, she said. A great poet must have a great toothache. A little poet, a little toothache. Oh, let me be a little poet, I begged. Let me be nothing at all. And I am not a poet. I have only fits of poetry, like fits of toothache. Go away, go away. Will you acknowledge, then, that I am mightier than poetry, philosophy, mathematics, and all the music? She said. Mightier than all those notions that are painted on canvas or carved in marble? I am older than every one of them. I was born close to the Garden of Paradise, just outside, where the wind blew and the wet toadstools grew. It was I who made Eve wear clothes in the cold weather, and Adam also. Believe me, there was power in the first toothache. I believe it all, I said, but go away, go away. Yes, if you will give up being a poet, never put verse on paper, slate, or any sort of writing material, then I will let you off. But I'll come again if you write poetry. I swear, I said. Only let me never see or feel you any more. See me you shall, but in a more substantial shape, in a shape more dear to you than I am now. You shall see me as Aunty Mila, and I shall say, write poetry, my sweet boy. You are a great poet, perhaps the greatest we have. But if you believe me and begin to write poetry, then I will set music to your verses and play them on your mouth harp. You sweet child, remember me when you see Aunty Mila. Then she disappeared. At our parting, I received a thrust through my jawbone like that of a red-hot awl, but it soon subsided, and then I felt as if I were gliding along the smooth water. I saw the white water lilies with their large green leaves bending and sinking down under me. They withered and dissolved, and I sank, too, and dissolved into peace and rest. To die and melt away like snow, resounded in the water, to evaporate into air, to drift away like the clouds. Great, glowing names and inscriptions on waving banners of victory, the letters patent of immortality, written on the wing of an ephemera, shone down to me through the water. The sleep was deep, a sleep now without dreams. I did not hear the whistling wind, the banging gate, the ringing of the neighbor's gate bell, or the lodger's strenuous gymnastics. What happiness! Then came a gust of wind so strong that the locked door to Auntie's room burst open. Auntie jumped up, put on her shoes, got dressed, and came into my room. I was sleeping like one of God's angels, she said, and she had not the heart to awaken me. I later awoke by myself and opened my eyes. I had completely forgotten that Auntie was in the house, but I soon remembered it, and then remembered my toothache vision. Dream and reality were blended. I suppose you did not write anything last night after we said good night, she said. I wish you had. You are my poet, and shall always be. It seemed to me that she smiled rather slyly. I did not know if it was the kindly Aunty Mila who loved me, or the terrible one to whom I had made the promise the night before. Have you written any poetry, sweet child? No, no, I shouted. You are Aunty Mila, aren't you? Who else? She said, and it was Aunty Mila. She kissed me, got into a carriage, and drove home. I wrote down what is written here. It is not in verse, and it will never be printed. Yes, here ended the manuscript. My young friend, the grocer's assistant, could not find the missing sheets. They had gone out into the world like the papers around the salted herring, the butter, and the green soap. They had fulfilled their destiny. The brewer is dead. Auntie is dead. The student is dead. He whose sparks of genius went into the basket. This is the end of the story. The story of Aunty Toothache. Which was the happiest? Such lovely roses, said the sunshine, its golden fingers caressing the garden. Each bud will soon unfold and open its silken heart. These are my children. It is I who have kissed them to life, painting their petals with warmth and light. They are my children, whispered the dew, glimmering on every leaf. I have nourished them with my tears before dawn, while the world still dreamed. I think I am their true mother, said the rose bush, standing proud yet tender. You, sunshine and dew, are only their godmothers, who have blessed them with gifts of your kindness and means. My lovely rose children, the three voices exclaimed together. May each of you find the greatest happiness. Yet only one could be happiest, and one, perhaps, least. But who would it be? I shall find out, said the wind, swirling gently through the leaves. I roam far and wide. I slip into the smallest cracks and whisper into the highest clouds. I know what happens everywhere, within and without. Every rose heard those words. Even the smallest buds, not yet open, trembled with curiosity. Then came a woman, dressed in mourning black, her face pale from grief. She moved slowly through the garden until she saw a half-blown rose, fresh and fragrant. This one, she murmured. This one will do. To her eyes, it was lovelier than all the rest. She carried it to her silent room, where only days before her young daughter had danced and laughed. Now the girl lay still in her coffin, white as marble. The mother kissed her child's cold forehead, then pressed her lips upon the rose. She laid it gently upon her daughter's breast, as if through its freshness and her own kiss, life might return once more. The rose quivered with wonder. What a sweet path I have been chosen for, it thought. I go where no rose has gone, kissed by a mother's sorrow, resting upon the breast of an angel child. Surely I am the happiest of all my sisters. In the same garden, an old woman came to weed the beds. Her eyes fell upon a full-blown rose, grand and heavy with perfume. One more day of sun, one more fall of dew, and you'll shatter, she said. Your beauty has lasted long enough. Now you shall serve a new purpose. She plucked the rose, wrapped it in newspaper, and carried it home. There she laid it among other faded blossoms and lavender in a jar of salt, a potpourri to keep fragrance long after death. See, cried the rose, I am granted an honor shared only by roses and kings. I am to be embalmed. Surely none could be happier. Later, two young men wandered through the garden. one a painter, the other a poet. Each chose a rose. The painter placed his flower before him and worked until its likeness lived forever on his canvas. "Now you will never fade," he said softly. "Ah," sighed the rose, "I shall live through ages, painted in light and color, remembered by eyes unborn. I must be the happiest of all." But the poet looked upon his rose and felt a song stir within him. He wrote verses of love and beauty, of life as brief and sweet as the bloom he held. When his poem was read by hearts yet to come, it would make the rose eternal in words. "Immortal in poetry!" cried the rose. What greater joy could there be? Behind them, hidden beneath the larger blooms, grew a small rose with a slight imperfection. It leaned askew, and within its heart a green crippled leaf had grown. "Poor child," whispered the wind, brushing its cheek. The rose blushed with pride, thinking the kiss was one of admiration. "I am different," it thought, "perhaps chosen for a special fate." A butterfly drifted down and kissed its petals. A fleeting suitor. The rose let him go. Then came a great green grasshopper who perched nearby and rubbed his legs together, a lover's song in his own way. The crooked rose thought he sang for her. "He loves me so much he could devour me," she thought, "and to be one with love is the highest bliss." But she turned him away. That night, beneath a starlit sky, a nightingale began to sing. "He sings only for me," thought the flawed rose. "Surely I am most favored of all." Later still, two gentlemen passed by smoking cigars. "Roses cannot bear tobacco," one said. "Let's see." They blew smoke upon the imperfect flower, not daring to risk the finer ones. "Ah, another honor," said the rose. "I am chosen again." But soon her color changed, and she turned green with vanity and with smoke. A gardener came next morning and picked the finest bud of the bush, arranging it with other blossoms in a grand bouquet. It was carried in a coach beside a handsome young heir to the theater, where lights glittered like a sea of stars. As the music swelled and applause thundered, a young dancer stepped into the light. Roses rained upon her feet. Among them fell the bouquet, in which the proud rose glittered like a gem. Overwhelmed by joy, it danced as it fell, breaking from its stem. A stagehand found it behind the curtain and, touched by its beauty, took it home. He placed it in a wine glass beside his frail old grandmother. The old woman smiled. "You did not come to the banquet of the rich," she said gently. "You came to brighten the heart of an old soul. To me, you are as lovely as a whole rose bush." Her eyes glowed with youth, reborn as she looked at it. The cracked window pane let in the wind, who whispered, "I saw her eyes shining like the morning, and the stemless rose glowing beside her. Yes, this one is truly the happiest of them all." And so each rose on the bush had its story, each believing itself the most blessed. Faith, after all, is the secret of happiness. The last rose, still clinging to the bush, said proudly, "I outlasted them all. I am the final blossom, my mother's cherished child, and I am the mother," said the rose bush. "No, I am," said the sunshine. "And I," said the dew. "Each has a part," declared the wind, rustling through the leaves. "And I have mine too. I carry their stories to the ends of the earth." Then the wind lifted the fallen petals and scattered them where the sun shone and the dew sparkled. "Now tell me," it whispered, "which rose was the happiest of them all?" And the garden remained silent, for happiness, like fragrance, belongs to all who believe in it. The butterfly. There was once a butterfly who had grown weary of drifting alone through fields of sunlight. The thought came to him one morning, while hovering over a dew pearl, that perhaps it was time to take a bride. He wanted, naturally, the prettiest and most graceful one he could find among the flowers. For who, he reasoned, could better suit a butterfly's delicate wings than a blossom's tender petals? He began his search with great seriousness, if such a word can ever apply to butterflies. Across the wide garden, he fluttered from border to border, peering with an exceedingly critical eye at every bed of blooms. They all sat so still upon their green stalks, like modest maidens on a Sunday, blushing beneath the sun and swaying ever so slightly in the breeze. Truly, they behaved as demure young ladies should behave before they are engaged. Yet there were so many of them that our butterfly soon grew dizzy from the abundance of beauty. Choosing seemed impossible, and when things become difficult, a butterfly, like many men, prefers to take a rest. So he went to consult the daisies, those white-petaled fortune-tellers the French so charmingly call Marguerite. They are said to prophesy matters of the heart. Lovers pluck away their leaves, whispering questions between each tear. Does she love me? Ardently? Truly? A little? Not at all? The flower gives its answer in silence, by the chance of its last petal. Every tongue in every land repeats the ritual. The butterfly approached one such daisy, glowing in the grass. "Dearest Marguerite," he said, pressing a gentle kiss on each of her leaves instead of cruelly plucking them. "You are the wisest lady in the garden, famed for your insight. Tell me, I beg you, which among your sisters shall be my bride? Point me to her, and I shall fly straight away to offer my heart." But Marguerite made no reply. She was affronted that he had called her a woman when she was clearly but a girl. And girls, you know, can be quite particular about such distinctions. He asked again and yet again, but she held her tongue in perfect silence. Then the butterfly, impatient and a little offended himself, fluttered off. "Very well," he thought. "I shall find a wife without your help." It was early spring, and the air was fragrant with the crocuses and snowdrops, those first tender heralds of the season. He admired their delicate gowns, white, blue, and lilac, and found them very charming indeed. "Pretty little maidens," he said, "but perhaps a bit too prim, too polite. Youth, after all, sometimes finds innocence a little dull." So he sought the older girls. The anemones caught his eye next, but he soon discovered a certain bitterness in their perfume, a sharpness that stung his taste. The violets were lovely, yes, but oh, so sentimental. They sighed and drooped and spoke only of devotion. The lime blossoms were sweet, but they came in large families, and the butterfly feared a mother-in-law behind every leaf. Then he turned to the apple blossoms, fair as roses, delicate as clouds. Yet he worried they would wither with the first breath of wind. "A wife who may fall tomorrow," he reasoned, "is no wife at all." At last he spied the pea blossom, half hidden among the vines. She was a vision, white with a blush of pink, slender as a maiden in her first ball gown. "Ah," said he, "here is grace, and usefulness besides. She can adorn the table and serve in the kitchen. What more could a sensible husband ask?" He hovered close, ready to declare himself, when his eyes fell upon a pod beside her, with a shriveled flower still clinging at the end. "And who might that be?" he asked politely. "My sister," said the pea blossom with a modest smile. "Your sister?" gasped the butterfly. "And you will one day look the same." Horrified, he flew off in great haste, for the sight of age before marriage chilled him to the core. Soon he came upon a honeysuckle twining along the hedge. She bent gracefully toward him, her scent sweet as honeyed wine. Yet there were too many just like her, with long, pale faces and thin complexions. "No, no," sighed the butterfly. "She is charming, but so is every other honeysuckle along the road." He desired something rare, something unique, and the search went on. Spring passed away. Summer ripened and waned. The orchards grew heavy with fruit. The sun grew weary. and the evenings turned gold. Still, the butterfly had made no choice. The flowers, now in their richest attire, paraded before him in splendid gowns of scarlet and purple. Yet he saw only that they had lost the fresh fragrance of youth. For the heart, even when it grows old, still seeks the scent of newness. And that is something no autumn bloom can give. So he turned his attention at last to the mint. Humble plant. She had no blossom to boast of, yet every leaf was full of sweetness, green and refreshing from top to root. Here, thought the butterfly, is virtue without vanity, fragrance without show. She shall be my bride. He made his declaration with great ceremony, but the mint listened quietly, standing stiff and dignified. When at last she answered, it was with gentle firmness, friendship, if you please, nothing more. You see, dear sir, we are both past our spring. You and I may comfort each other in conversation, but marriage? No, let us not make ourselves ridiculous. And so the butterfly, after all his fluttering and philosophizing, obtained no bride. He had delayed too long, and those who spend their years choosing often end by choosing nothing. Thus he became what the world calls an old bachelor, a title more melancholy than grand. Autumn deepened into gray. Rain drummed upon the leaves. The winds rattled the willows until they groaned, and the bright world of summer faded into mist. It was no weather for a creature in gossamer clothes. Fortunately, the butterfly found shelter by chance in a warm human dwelling. There, beside a crackling stove, it was as mild as July. "Ah," said he, "here I can exist quite comfortably." But after a while, existence alone seemed a meager comfort. "To exist is not enough," he murmured. "I need sunshine, freedom, and a little flower to love." He fluttered against the window pane, longing for the open air. Those in the room saw the flash of his wings, admired him, caught him gently, and pinned him to a board in a cabinet of curiosities. "There," they said, "he will stay preserved forever." The butterfly, still vain even in captivity, tried to console himself. "Now I am perched upon a stalk, like the flowers I once courted," he said. "True, it is not very pleasant, but perhaps this is what marriage feels like. One cannot move, yet one must look beautiful. Yes, perhaps this is wedded life." "That is poor comfort indeed," whispered a potted geranium nearby, its leaves quivering in sympathy. "Ah," thought the butterfly with a faint smile, "one cannot quite trust these plants that live in pots. They have seen too much of mankind." And so he hung there, still, glittering, beautiful, and utterly alone. The ABC book. Once there was a man who had written some new rhymes for the ABC book. 2 lines for each letter, just as in the old ABC book. He believed the old rhymes were too antiquated, that something new was needed, and he thought well indeed of his own rhymes. His new ABC book was still only in handwriting, and already it had been placed beside the old printed one in the great bookcase where there stood many books, both of knowledge and for amusement. But the old ABC book didn't want to be a neighbor to the new one, and therefore had sprung down from the shelf and at the same time had given the new one a push, so that it, as well as the old one, now lay on the floor, with all its loose leaves scattered about. The old ABC book lay open at the first page, and that is the most important page, for there all the letters, large and small, are displayed. That one page contains on it the essence of all the books that ever were written. It contains the alphabet, that wonderful army of signs which rules the world. Truly a marvelous power they have. Everything depends on the order in which they are commanded to stand. They have the power to give life or to kill, to gladden and to sadden. Separately, they mean nothing, but marshaled and ranked in word formations, what can they not accomplish? Yes, when God put them into man's thoughts, human strength became inferior to that which lay in the alphabet, and we yielded with a deep bow. There, then, they lay now, facing upward, and the cock, which was pictured at the big A of the alphabet, gleamed with feathers of red, blue, and green. Proudly, he puffed himself up and ruffled his plumage, for he knew how important the letters were, and that he was the only living thing among them. When he found the old ABC book had fallen open on the floor, he flapped his wings, flew out, and perched himself on a corner of the bookcase. There he preened himself with his beak and crowed loudly and long. Every single book in the case, all of which would stand day and night, as if in a trance when nobody was reading them, was roused by his trumpet call. Then the cock spoke out loudly and clearly about the way the worthy old ABC book had been insulted. Everything has to be new and different nowadays, he said. Everything has to be advanced. Children are so wise that they can read before they have even learned the alphabet. They should have something new, said the man who wrote those new verses sprawling there on the floor. I know them all by heart. He admires them so much that I have heard him read them aloud more than 10 times over. No, I prefer my own. The good old rhymes with xanthus for X, and with the pictures that belong to them. I'll fight for them and crow for them. Every book in the case here knows them very well. Now, I'll read aloud these new rhymes. I'll try to read them patiently, and I know we'll all agree they're worthless. A. Adam. Had Adam obeyed, he'd not have had to leave the garden where first dwelt he and Eve. B. Bank. B. The bank is a place where you put your money. The bee is an insect that gathers honey. Now that verse I find profoundly insipid, said the cock. But I'll read on. See, Columbus. Columbus sailed the ocean to the distant shore, and then the earth became twice as big as before. D. Denmark. About the kingdom of Denmark. There's a saying which goes, God's hand protects it, as every Dane knows. That many people will consider beautiful, said the cock. But I don't. I see nothing beautiful about it. But I'll go on. E. Elephant. The elephant has a heavy step, though young in heart, and full of pep. F. Face. The moon above feels at its best when an eclipse gives its face a rest. G. Goat. It is easier to sail a boat than to teach manners to a goat. H. Hurrah. Hurrah is a word we often hear. How often does the deed merit such cheer? How will a child understand that? Said the cock. I suppose they'll put on the title page, A, B, C book for big people and little people, but the big people have something else to do besides read the rhymes in A, B, C books, and the little people won't be able to understand them. There is a limit to everything. But to continue. J. Job. We have a job to do on earth, till earth becomes our final birth. Now that's crude, said the cock. K. Kitten. When kittens grow up, we call them cats, and hope they'll catch our mice and rats. L. Lion. The savage lion has much more sense than the arty critic's stinging offense. How are you going to explain that one to children? Said the cock. M. Morning sun. The golden morning sun arose, but not because of the cock's crows. Now he's getting personal, said the cock. But then I'm in excellent company. I'm in company with the sun. Let's go on. N. Negro black is a Negro, black as night, and we cannot wash him white. O. Olive leaf, the best of leaves. You know its name? The dove's olive leaf, of Bible fame. P. Peace, that peace may ever reign, far and near, is indeed a hope we all hold dear. Q. Queen. Quack. A queen is a lady of royal position. A quack is a fake and not a physician. R. Round. One may be round, and well extended, but that doesn't mean one is well descended. S. Swine. Be not a braggart. Be honest and true, though many swine in the forest belong to you. Will you permit me to crow? Said the cock. It tries your strength, reading so much. I must catch my breath. And then he crowed, shrill as a trumpet of brass. And it was a great pleasure to listen to, for the cock. I'll go on. Tea kettle, tea urn. The tea kettle in the kitchen will always belong, and yet to the tea urn it gives its song. You, universe, our universe will always be, through ages to eternity. Now that is meant to be deep, said the cock. It's so deep, I can't get to the bottom of it. W. Washerwoman. A washerwoman will wash and scrub until there's nothing left but the tub. Now, it's certainly impossible that he can have found anything new for X. X. Xantippe. In the sea of marriage are rocks of strife, as Socrates found with Xantippe, his wife. He would have to take Xantippe. Xanthus is much better. Why? Yggdrasil. Under Yggdrasil tree the gods sat every day, but the tree is dead, and the gods have gone away. Now we are almost through, said the cock. That's a relief. I'll continue on. Z. Zephyr. Zephyr, in Danish, is a west wind so cold it penetrates fur and skin, we're told. That's that. But that's not the end of it. Now it will be printed, and then it will be read. It will be offered in place of the noble old rhymes in my book. What says this assembly? Learned and not so learned, single volumes and collected works. What says the alphabet? I have spoken. Now let the others act. The books stood still, and the bookcase stood still. But the cock flew back to his place at the capital A in the old ABC book and looked proudly around. I have spoken well, and I have crowed well. The new ABC book can't do anything like that. It will certainly die. In fact, it's dead already, for it has no cock. The girl who trod on the loaf. There was once a girl who trod on a loaf to avoid soiling her shoes, and the misfortunes that happened to her in consequence are well known. Her name was Ing. She was a poor child, but proud and presuming, and with a bad and cruel disposition. When quite a little child, she would delight in catching flies and tearing off their wings so as to make creeping things of them. When older, she would take cockchafers and beetles and stick pins through them. Then she pushed a green leaf or a little scrap of paper towards their feet, and when the poor creatures would seize it and hold it fast and turn over and over in their struggles to get free from the pin, she would say, the cockchafer is reading. See how he turns over the leaf. She grew worse instead of better with years, and, unfortunately, she was pretty, which caused her to be excused when she should have been sharply reproved. Your headstrong will require severity to conquer it, her mother often said to her. As a little child, you used to trample on my apron, but one day, I fear, you will trample on my heart. And alas, this fear was realized. Ing was taken to the house of some rich people who lived at a distance and who treated her as their own child and dressed her so fine that her pride and arrogance increased. When she had been there about a year, her patroness said to her, "You ought to go, for once, and see your parents, Ing." So Inga started to go and visit her parents, but she only wanted to show herself in her native place, that the people might see how fine she was. She reached the entrance of the village and saw the young laboring men and maidens standing together chatting, and her own mother amongst them. Inga's mother was sitting on a stone to rest, with a faggot of sticks lying before her, which she had picked up in the wood. Then Ing turned back. She, who was so finely dressed, she felt ashamed of her mother, a poorly clad woman who picked up wood in the forest. She did not turn back out of pity for her mother's poverty, but from pride. Another half-year went by, and her mistress said, "You ought to go home again and visit your parents, Ing, and I will give you a large wheaten loaf to take to them. They will be glad to see you, I am sure." So Ing put on her best clothes and her new shoes, drew her dress up around her, and set out, stepping very carefully, that she might be clean and neat about the feet. And there was nothing wrong in doing so. But when she came to the place where the footpath led across the moor, she found small pools of water and a great deal of mud. So she threw the loaf into the mud and trod upon it, that she might pass without wetting her feet. But as she stood with one foot on the loaf and the other lifted up to step forward, the loaf began to sink under her, lower and lower, till she disappeared altogether, and only a few bubbles on the surface of the muddy pool remained to show where she had sunk. And this is the story. But where did Ing go? She sank into the ground and went down to the marsh woman, who is always brewing there. The marsh woman is related to the elf maidens, who are well known, for songs are sung and pictures painted about them. But of the marsh woman, nothing is known, excepting that when a mist arises from the meadows in summertime, it is because she is brewing beneath them. To the marsh, woman's brewery, Ing sunk down to a place which no one can endure for long. A heap of mud is a palace compared with the marsh woman's brewery. and as Ing fell, she shuddered in every limb, and soon became cold and stiff as marble. Her foot was still fastened to the loaf, which bowed her down as a golden ear of corn bends the stem. An evil spirit soon took possession of Ing and carried her to a still worse place, in which she saw crowds of unhappy people waiting in a state of agony for the gates of mercy to be opened to them. And in every heart was a miserable and eternal feeling of unrest. It would take too much time to describe the various tortures these people suffered, but Inga's punishment consisted in standing there as a statue, with her foot fastened to the loaf. She could move her eyes about and see all the misery around her, but she could not turn her head. And when she saw the people looking at her, she thought they were admiring her pretty face and fine clothes, for she was still vain and proud. But she had forgotten how soiled her clothes had become while in the marsh woman's brewery, and that they were covered with mud. A snake had also fastened itself in her hair and hung down her back, while from each fold in her dress a great toad peeped out and croaked like an asthmatic poodle. Worse than all was the terrible hunger that tormented her, and she could not stoop to break off a piece of the loaf on which she stood. No, her back was too stiff, and her whole body like a pillar of stone, and then came creeping over her face and eyes, flies without wings. She winked and blinked, but they could not fly away, for their wings had been pulled off. This, added to the hunger she felt, was horrible torture. "If this lasts much longer," she said, "I shall not be able to bear it." But it did last, and she had to bear it, without being able to help herself. A tear, followed by many scalding tears, fell upon her head and rolled over her face and neck, down to the loaf on which she stood. Who could be weeping for Ing? She had a mother in the world still, and the tears of sorrow which a mother sheds for her child will always find their way to the child's heart, but they often increase the torment instead of being a relief. And Ing could hear all that was said about her in the world she had left, and everyone seemed cruel to her. The sin she had committed in treading on the loaf was known on earth, for she had been seen by the cowherd from the hill when she was crossing the marsh and had disappeared, when her mother wept and exclaimed, "Ah, Ing, what grief thou hast caused thy mother." She would say, "Oh, that I had never been born. My mother's tears are useless now." And then the words of the kind people who had adopted her came to her ears, when they said, "Ing was a sinful girl who did not value the gifts of God, but trampled them under her feet." Ah, thought Ing, they should have punished me and driven all my naughty tempers out of me. A song was made about the girl who trod on a loaf to keep her shoes from being soiled, and this song was sung everywhere. The story of her sin was also told to the little children, and they called her Wicked Ing, and said she was so naughty that she ought to be punished. Ing heard all this, and her heart became hardened and full of bitterness. But one day, while hunger and grief were gnawing in her hollow frame, she heard a little innocent child, while listening to the tale of the vain, haughty Ing, burst into tears and exclaim, "But will she never come up again?" And she heard the reply, "No, she will never come up again." But if she were to say she was sorry and ask pardon and promise never to do so again? Asked the little one. Yes, then she might come, but she will not beg pardon, was the answer. Oh, I wish she would, said the child, who was quite unhappy about it. I should be so glad. I would give up my doll and all my playthings if she could only come here again. Poor Ing. It is so dreadful for her. These pitying words penetrated to Ing's inmost heart and seemed to do her good. It was the first time anyone had said, "Poor Ing," without saying something about her faults. A little innocent child was weeping and praying for mercy for her. It made her feel quite strange, and she would gladly have wept herself. And it added to her torment to find she could not do so. And while she thus suffered in a place where nothing changed, years passed away on earth, and she heard her name less frequently mentioned. But one day, a sigh reached her ear, and the words, "Ing, Ing, what a grief thou hast been to me. I said it would be so." It was the last sigh of her dying mother. After this, Inga heard her kind mistress say, "Ah, poor Inga, shall I ever see thee again? Perhaps I may, for we know not what may happen in the future." But Inga knew right well that her mistress would never come to that dreadful place. Time passed, a long, bitter time. Then Ing heard her name pronounced once more, and saw what seemed two bright stars shining above her. They were two gentle eyes closing on earth. Many years had passed since the little girl had lamented and wept about Tua. Poor Ing. That child was now an old woman whom God was taking to himself. In the last hour of existence, the events of a whole life often appear before us. And this hour, the old woman remembered how, when a child, she had shed tears over the story of Ing, and she prayed for her now as the eyes of the old woman closed to earth. The eyes of the soul opened upon the hidden things of eternity. And then she, in whose last thoughts Ing had been so vividly present, saw how deeply the poor girl had sunk. She burst into tears at the sight, and in heaven, as she had done when a little child on earth, she wept and prayed for poor Inga. Her tears and her prayers echoed through the dark void that surrounded the tormented captive soul, and the unexpected mercy was obtained for it through an angel's tears. As in thought, Inga seemed to act over again every sin she had committed on earth. She trembled, and tears she had never yet been able to weep rushed to her eyes. It seemed impossible that the gates of mercy could ever be opened to her. But while she acknowledged this in deep penitence, a beam of radiant light shot suddenly into the depths upon her, more powerful than the sunbeam that dissolves the man of snow which the children have raised, more quickly than the snowflake melts and becomes a drop of water on the warm lips of a child, was the stony form of unchanged. And as a little bird she soared, with the speed of lightning, upward to the world of mortals. A bird that felt timid and shy to all things around it, that seemed to shrink with shame from meeting any living creature, and hurriedly sought to conceal itself in a dark corner of an old ruined wall. There it sat cowering and unable to utter a sound, for it was voiceless. Yet how quickly the little bird discovered the beauty of everything around it. The sweet, fresh air, the soft radiance of the moon as its light spread over the earth, the fragrance which exhaled from bush and tree made it feel happy as it sat there, clothed in its fresh, bright plumage. All creation seemed to speak of beneficence and love. The bird wanted to give utterance to thoughts that stirred in his breast, as the cuckoo and the nightingale in the spring, but it could not. Yet in heaven can be heard the song of praise, even from a worm, and the notes trembling in the breast of the bird were as audible to heaven even as the Psalms of David before they had fashioned themselves into words and song. Christmas time drew near, and a peasant who dwelt close by the old wall stuck up a pole with some ears of corn fastened to the top, that the birds of heaven might have feast and rejoice in the happy, blessed time. And on Christmas morning, the sun arose and shone upon the ears of corn, which were quickly surrounded by a number of twittering birds. Then, from a hole in the wall, gushed forth in song the swelling thoughts of the bird as he issued from his hiding place to perform his first good deed on earth. And in heaven, it was well known who that bird was. The winter was very hard. The ponds were covered with ice, and there was very little food for either the beasts of the field or the birds of the air. Our little bird flew away into the public roads and found here and there in the ruts of the sledges, a grain of corn, and at the halting places some crumbs. Of these he ate only a few, but he called around him the other birds and the hungry sparrows, that they too might have food. He flew into the towns and looked about, and wherever a kind hand had strewed bread on the windowsill for the birds, he only ate a single crumb himself, and gave all the rest to the rest of the other birds. In the course of the winter, the bird had in this way collected many crumbs and given them to other birds, till they equaled the weight of the loaf on which Ink had trod to keep her shoes clean. And when the last breadcrumb had been found and given, the gray wings of the bird became white and spread themselves out for flight. "See, yonder is a seagull," cried the children when they saw the white bird as it dived into the sea and rose again into the clear sunlight, white and glittering. But no one could tell whither it went then, although some declared it flew straight to the sun. Ib and Little Christina, in the forest that extends from the banks of the Gudenau, in North Jutland, a long way into the country, and not far from the clear stream, rises a great ridge of land, which stretches through the wood like a wall. Westward of this ridge, and not far from the river, stands a farmhouse, surrounded by such poor land that the sandy soil shows itself between the scanty ears of rye and wheat which grow in it. Some years have passed since the people who lived here cultivated these fields. They kept 3 sheep, a pig, and 2 oxen. In fact, they maintained themselves very well. They had quite enough to live upon, as people generally have who are content with their lot. They even could have afforded to keep 2 horses, but it was a saying among the farmers in those parts, "The horse eats himself up." That is to say, he eats as much as he earns. Jeppe Jans cultivated his fields in summer, and in the winter he made wooden shoes. He also had an assistant, a lad who understood as well as he himself did how to make wooden shoes strong, but light, and in the fashion. They carved shoes and spoons, which paid well. Therefore, no one could justly call Jeppe Jans and his family poor people. Little Ib, a boy of 7 years old and the only child, would sit by, watching the workmen or cutting a stick, and sometimes his finger instead of the stick. But one day, Ib succeeded so well in his carving that he made 2 pieces of wood look really like 2 little wooden shoes, and he determined to give them as a present to Little Christina. And who was Little Christina? She was the boatman's daughter, graceful and delicate as the child of a gentleman. Had she been dressed differently, no one would have believed that she lived in a hut on the neighboring heath with her father. He was a widower, and earned his living by carrying firewood in his large boat from the forest to the eel pond and eel weir on the estate of Silkeborg, and sometimes even to the distant town of Randers. There was no one under whose care he could leave little Christina, so she was almost always with him in his boat, or playing in the wood among the blossoming heath, or picking the ripe wild berries. Sometimes, when her father had to go as far as the town, he would take little Christina, who was a year younger than Ib, across the heath to the cottage of Jeppe Jans, and leave her there. Ib and Christina agreed together in everything. They divided their bread and berries when they were hungry. They were partners in digging their little gardens. They ran and crept and played about everywhere. Once they wandered a long way into the forest, and even ventured together to climb the high ridge. Another time, they found a few snipe's eggs in the wood, which was a great event. Ib had never been on the heath where Christina's father lived, nor on the river, but at last came an opportunity. Christina's father invited him to go for a sail in his boat, and the evening before, he accompanied the boatman across the heath to his house. The next morning early, the two children were placed on the top of a high pile of firewood in the boat, and sat eating bread and wild strawberries, while Christina's father and his man drove the boat forward with poles. They floated on swiftly, for the tide was in their favor, passing over lakes formed by the stream in its course. Sometimes they seemed quite enclosed by reeds and water plants, yet there was always room for them to pass out. Although the old trees overhung the water, and the old oaks stretched out their bare branches, as if they had turned up their sleeves and wished to show their knotty, naked arms. Old alder trees, whose roots were loosened from the banks, clung with their fibers to the bottom of the stream, and the tops of the branches above the water looked like little woody islands. The water lilies waved themselves to and fro on the river. Everything made the excursion beautiful. And at last they came to the great eel weir, where the water rushed through the floodgates, and the children thought this a beautiful sight. In those days, there was no factory, nor any townhouse, nothing but the great farm, with its scanty bearing fields, in which could be seen a few herd of cattle, and one or two farm laborers. The rushing of the water through the sluices and the scream of the wild ducks were almost the only signs of active life at Silkeborg. After the firewood had been unloaded, Christina's father bought a whole bundle of eels and a sucking pig, which were all placed in a basket in the stern of the boat. Then they returned again up the stream, and as the wind was favorable, 2 sails were hoisted, which carried the boat on, as well as if 2 horses had been harnessed to it. As they sailed on, they came by chance to the place where the boatman's assistant lived, at a little distance from the bank of the river. The boat was moored, and the two men, after desiring the children to sit still, both went on shore. They obeyed this order for a very short time, and then forgot it altogether. First, they peeped into the basket containing the eels and the sucking pig. Then they must needs pull out the pig and take it in their hands, and feel it, and touch it. And as they both wanted to hold it at the same time, the consequence was that they let it fall into the water, and the pig sailed away with the stream. Here was a terrible disaster. Ib jumped ashore and ran a little distance from the boat. "Oh, take me with you," cried Christina, and she sprang after him. In a few minutes, they found themselves deep in a thicket, and could no longer see the boat or the shore. They ran on a little farther, and then Christina fell down and began to cry. Ib helped her up and said, "Never mind, follow me. Yonder is the house." But the house was not yonder, and they wandered still farther over the dry, rustling leaves of the last year, and treading on fallen branches that crackled under their little feet. Then they heard a loud, piercing cry, and they stood still to listen. Presently, the scream of an eagle sounded through the wood. It was an ugly cry, and it frightened the children. But before them, in the thickest part of the forest, grew the most beautiful blackberries, in wonderful quantities. They looked so inviting that the children could not help stopping, and they remained there so long eating that their mouths and cheeks became quite black with the juice. Presently, they heard the frightful scream again, and Christina said, "We shall get into trouble about that pig." "Oh, never mind," said Ib. "We will go home to my father's house. It is here in the wood." So they went on, but the road led them out of the way. No house could be seen. It grew dark, and the children were afraid. The solemn stillness that reigned around them was now and then broken by the shrill cries of the great horned owl and other birds that they knew nothing of. At last, they both lost themselves in the thicket. Christina began to cry, and then Ib cried too. And after weeping and lamenting for some time, they stretched themselves down on the dry leaves and fell asleep. The sun was high in the heavens when the two children woke. They felt cold, but not far from their resting place. On a hill, the sun was shining through the trees. They thought if they went there, they should be warm, and Ib fancied he should be able to see his father's house from such a high spot. But they were far away from home now, in quite another part of the forest. They clambered to the top of the rising ground and found themselves on the edge of a declivity, which sloped down to a clear, transparent lake. Great quantities of fish could be seen through the clear water, sparkling in the sun's rays. They were quite surprised when they came so suddenly upon such an unexpected sight. Close to where they stood grew a hazel bush covered with beautiful nuts. They soon gathered some, cracked them, and ate the fine young kernels, which were only just ripe. But there was another surprise and fright in store for them. Out of the thicket stepped a tall old woman, her face quite brown, and her hair of a deep shining black. The whites of her eyes glittered like a Moor's. On her back she carried a bundle, and in her hand a knotted stick. She was a gypsy. The children did not at first understand what she said. She drew out of her pocket 3 large nuts, in which she told them were hidden the most beautiful and lovely things in the world. For they were wishing nuts. Ib looked at her, and as she spoke so kindly, he took courage and asked her if she would give him the nuts. And the woman gave them to him, and then gathered some more from the bushes for herself, quite a pocketful. Ib and Christina looked at the wishing nuts with wide open eyes. "Is there in this nut a carriage with a pair of horses?" asked Ib. "Yes, there is a golden carriage with 2 golden horses," replied the woman. "Then give me that nut," said Christina. So Ib gave it to her, and the strange woman tied up the nut for her in her handkerchief. Ib held up another nut. "Is there in this nut a pretty little neckerchief like the one Christina has on her neck?" asked Ib. "There are 10 neckerchiefs in it," she replied, "as well as beautiful dresses, stockings, and a hat and veil." "Then I will have that one also," said Christina, "and it is a pretty one too." And then Ib gave her the second nut. The third was a little black thing. "You may keep that one," said Christina. "It is quite as pretty." "What is in it?" asked Ib. "The best of all things for you," replied the gypsy. So Ib held the nut very tight. Then the woman promised to lead the children to the right path, that they might find their way home, and they went forward certainly in quite another direction to the one they meant to take. Therefore, no one ought to speak against the woman and say that she wanted to steal the children. In the wild wood path, they met a forester who knew Ib, and by his help, Ib and Christina reached home, where they found everyone had been very anxious about them. They were pardoned and forgiven, although they really had both done wrong and deserved to get into trouble. First, because they had let the sucking pig fall into the water, and secondly, because they had run away. Christina was taken back to her father's house on the heath, and Ib remained in the farmhouse on the borders of the wood, near the great land ridge. The first thing Ib did that evening was to take out of his pocket the little black nut in which the best thing of all was said to be enclosed. He laid it carefully between the door and the doorpost, and then shut the door so that the nut cracked directly. But there was not much kernel to be seen. It was what we should call hollow or worm-eaten, and looked as if it had been filled with tobacco or rich black earth. "It is just what I expected," exclaimed Ib. "How should there be room in a little nut like this for the best thing of all? Christina will find her 2 nuts just the same. There will be neither fine clothes or a golden carriage in them." Winter came, and the new year many years passed away, until Ib was old enough to be confirmed, and therefore he went during a whole winter to the clergyman of the nearest village to be prepared. One day, about this time, the boatman paid a visit to Ib's parents and told them that Christina was going to service, and that she had been remarkably fortunate in obtaining a good place with most respectable people. "Only think," he said, "she is going to the rich innkeepers at the hotel in Herning, many miles west from here. She is to assist the landlady in the housekeeping, and if afterwards she behaves well and remains to be confirmed, the people will treat her as their own daughter." So Ib and Christina took leave of each other. People already called them the betrothed. And at parting, the girl showed Ib the 2 nuts, which she had taken care of ever since the time that they lost themselves in the wood. And she told him also that the little wooden shoes he once carved for her when he was a boy, and gave her as a present, had been carefully kept in a drawer ever since. And so they parted. After Ib's confirmation, he remained at home with his mother, for he had become a clever shoemaker, and in summer managed the farm for her quite alone. His father had been dead some time, and his mother kept no farm servants. Sometimes, but very seldom, he heard of Christina through a postilion or eel seller who was passing. But she was well off with the rich innkeeper, and after being confirmed, she wrote a letter to her father, in which was a kind message to Ib and his mother. In this letter, she mentioned that her master and mistress had made her a present of a beautiful new dress and some nice underclothes. This was, of course, pleasant news. One day, in the following spring, there came a knock at the door of the house where Ib's old mother lived, and when they opened it, lo and behold, in stepped the boatman and Christina. She had come to pay them a visit and to spend the day. A carriage had to come from the Herning Hotel to the next village, and she had taken the opportunity to see her friends once more. She looked as elegant as a real lady and wore a pretty dress, beautifully made on purpose for her. There she stood, in full dress, while Ib wore only his working clothes. He could not utter a word. He could only seize her hand and hold it fast in his own. But he felt too happy and glad to oat his lips. Christina, however, was quite at her ease. She talked and kissed him in the most friendly manner. Even afterwards, when they were left alone, and she asked, "Did you know me again, Ib?" He still stood holding her hand and said at last, "You are become quite a grand lady, Christina, and I am only a rough working man, but I have often thought of you and of old times." Then they wandered up the great ridge and looked across the stream to the heath, where the little hills were covered with the flowering broom. Ib said nothing. But before the time came for them to part, it became quite clear to him that Christina must be his wife. Had they not, even in childhood, been called the betrothed? To him, it seemed as if they were really engaged to each other, although not a word had been spoken on the subject. They had only a few more hours to remain together, for Christina was obliged to return that evening to the neighboring village, to be ready for the carriage which was to start the next morning early for Herning. Ib and her father accompanied her to the village. It was a fine moonlight evening, and when they arrived, Ib stood holding Christina's hand in his, as if he could not let her go. His eyes brightened, and the words he uttered came with hesitation from his lips, but from the deepest recesses of his heart. "Christina, if you have not become too grand, and if you can be contented to live in my mother's house as my wife, we will be married someday. But we can wait for a while." "Oh, yes," she replied. "Let us wait a little longer, Ib. I can trust you, for I believe that I do love you. But let me think it over." Then he kissed her lips, and so they parted. On the way home, Ib told the boatman that he and Christina were as good as engaged to each other, and the boatman found out that he had always expected it would be so, and went home with Ib that evening, and remained the night in the farmhouse. But nothing further was said of the engagement. During the next year, 2 letters passed between Ib and Christina. They were signed, "Faithful till death." But at the end of that time, one day, the boatman came over to see Ib, with a kind greeting from Christina. He had something else to say, which made him hesitate in a strange manner. At last, it came out that Christina, who had grown a very pretty girl, was more lucky than ever. She was courted and admired by everyone. But her master's son, who had been home on a visit, was so much pleased with Christina that he wished to marry her. He had a very good situation in an office at Copenhagen, and as she had also taken a liking for him, his parents were not unwilling to consent. But Christina, in her heart, often thought of Ib, and knew how much he thought of her. So she felt inclined to refuse this good fortune, added the boatman. At first, Ib said not a word, but he became as white as the wall, and shook his head gently. And then he spoke. Christina must not refuse this good fortune. Then will you write a few words to her? Said the boatman. Ib sat down to write, but he could not get on at all. The words were not what he wished to say, so he tore up the page. The following morning, however, a letter lay ready to be sent to Christina, and the following is what he wrote. The letter written by you to your father I have read, and see from it that you are prosperous in everything, and that still better fortune is in store for you. Ask your own heart, Christina, and think over carefully what awaits you if you take me for your husband, for I possess very little in the world. Do not think of me or of my position. Think only of your own welfare. You are bound to me by no promises, and if in your heart you have given me one, I release you from it. May every blessing and happiness be poured out upon you, Christina. Heaven will give me the heart's consolation. Ever your sincere friend, Ib. This letter was sent, and Christina received it in due time. In the course of the following November, her banns were published in the church on the heath, and also in Copenhagen, where the bridegroom lived. She was taken to Copenhagen under the protection of her future mother-in-law, because the bridegroom could not spare time from his numerous occupations for a journey so far into Jutland. On the journey, Christina met her father at one of the villages through which they passed, and here he took leave of her. Very little was said about the matter to Ib, and he did not refer to it. His mother, however, noticed that he had grown very silent and pensive, thinking as he did of old times. No wonder the 3 nuts came into his mind which the gypsy woman had given him when a child, and of the 2 which he had given to Christina. These wishing nuts, after all, had proved true fortune-tellers. One had contained a gilded carriage and noble horses, and the other beautiful clothes. All of these Christina would now have in her new home at Copenhagen. Her part had come true. And for him, the nut had contained only black earth. The gypsy woman had said it was the best for him. Perhaps it was. And this also would be fulfilled. He understood the gypsy woman's meaning now. The black earth, the dark grave, was the best thing for him now. Again, years passed away. Not many, but they seemed long years to Ib. The old innkeeper and his wife died one after the other, and the whole of their property, many $1,000s, was inherited by their son. Christina could have the golden carriage now, and plenty of fine clothes. During the 2 long years which followed, no letter came from Christina to her father, and when at last her father received one from her, it did not speak of prosperity or happiness. Poor Christina. Neither she nor her husband understood how to economize or save, and the riches brought no blessing with them because they had not asked for it. Years passed, and for many summers the heath was covered with bloom. In winter, the snow rested upon it, and the rough winds blew across the ridge under which stood Ib's sheltered home. One spring day, the sun shone brightly, and he was guiding the plow across his field. The plowshare struck against something which he fancied was a firestone, and then he saw glittering in the earth a splinter of shining metal which the plow had cut from something which gleamed brightly in the furrow. He searched and found a large golden armlet of superior workmanship, and it was evident that the plow had disturbed a Hun's grave. He searched further and found more valuable treasures, which Ib showed to the clergyman, who explained their value to him. Then he went to the magistrate, who informed the president of the Museum of the Discovery, and advised Ib to take the treasures himself to the president. "You have found in the earth the best thing you could find," said the magistrate. "The best thing," thought Ib, "the very best thing for me, and found in the earth. Well, if it really is so, then the gypsy woman was right in her prophecy." So Ib went in the ferry boat from Aarhus to Copenhagen. To him who had only sailed once or twice on the river near his own home, this seemed like a voyage on the ocean. And at length he arrived at Copenhagen. The value of the gold he had found was paid to him. It was a large sum, $600. Then Ib of the Heath went out and wandered about in the great city. On the evening before the day, he had settled to return with the captain of the passage boat. Ib lost himself in the streets and took quite a different turning to the one he wished to follow. He wandered on till he found himself in a poor street of the suburb called Christian's Haven. Not a creature could be seen. At last, a very little girl came out of one of the wretched-looking houses, and Ib asked her to tell him the way to the street he wanted. She looked up timidly at him and began to cry bitterly. He asked her what was the matter, but what she said he could not understand. So he went along the street with her, and as they passed under a lamp, the light fell on the little girl's face. A strange sensation came over Ib as he caught sight of it. The living, breathing embodiment of little Christina stood before him, just as he remembered her in the days of her childhood. He followed the child to the wretched house and ascended the narrow, crazy staircase which led to a little garret in the roof. The air in the room was heavy and stifling. No light was burning, and from one corner came sounds of moaning and sighing. It was the mother of the child who lay there on a miserable bed. With the help of a match, Ib struck a light and approached her. "Can I be of any service to you?" he asked. "This little girl brought me up here, but I am a stranger in this city. Are there no neighbors or anyone whom I can call?" Then he raised the head of the sick woman and smoothed her pillow. He started as he did so. It was Christina of the Heath. No one had mentioned her name to Ib for years. It would have disturbed his peace of mind, especially as the reports respecting her were not good. The wealth which her husband had inherited from his parents had made him proud and arrogant. He had given up his certain appointment and traveled for 6 months in foreign lands, and on his return had lived in great style and got into terrible debt. For a time, he had trembled on the high pedestal on which he had placed himself, till at last he toppled over, and ruin came. His numerous, merry companions and the visitors at his table said it served him right, for he had kept house like a madman. One morning, his corpse was found in the canal. The cold hand of death had already touched the heart of Christina, her youngest child, looked for in the midst of prosperity, had sunk into the grave when only a few weeks old, and at last Christina herself became sick unto death, and lay, forsaken and dying, in a miserable room. Amid poverty she might have borne in her younger days, but which was now more painful to her from the luxuries to which she had lately been accustomed. It was her eldest child, also a little Christina, whom Ib had followed to her home, where she suffered hunger and poverty with her mother. It makes me unhappy to think that I shall die and leave this poor child, sighed she. Oh, what will become of her? She could say no more. Then Ib brought out another match and lighted a piece of candle which he found in the room, and it threw a glimmering light over the wretched dwelling. Ib looked at the little girl and thought of Christina in her young days. For her sake, could he not love this child, who was a stranger to him? As he thus reflected, the dying woman opened her eyes and gazed at him. Did she recognize him? He never knew, for not another word escaped her lips. In the forest by the river Goudenau, not far from the heath, and beneath the ridge of land, stood the little farm, newly painted and whitewashed. The air was heavy and dark. There were no blossoms on the heath. The autumn winds whirled the yellow leaves towards the boatman's hut in which strangers dwelt. But the little farm stood safely sheltered beneath the tall trees and the high ridge. The turf blazed brightly on the hearth, and within was sunlight, the sparkling light from the sunny eyes of a child, the bird-like tones from the rosy lips ringing like the song of a lark in spring, all was life and joy. Little Christina sat on Ib's knee. Ib was, to her, both father and mother. Her own parents had vanished from her memory, as a dream picture vanishes alike from childhood and age. Ib's house was well and prettily furnished, for he was a prosperous man now, while the mother of the little girl rested in the churchyard at Copenhagen, where she had died in poverty. Ib had money now, money which had come to him out of the black earth, and he had Christina for his own, after all. What the whole family said? What did the whole family say? Well, listen first to what little Marie said. It was little Marie's birthday, her own shining, perfect day. She awoke that morning with the kind of happiness that sparkles even before the eyes are fully open. The sun itself seemed to rise just for her, slipping through the curtains like golden ribbons that danced on her blanket. Mother kissed her cheeks and said, "Good morning, my birthday girl." And the house already hummed with quiet excitement. Soon her friends arrived, a troop of laughing children carrying bright ribbons and paper flowers. They filled the room with chatter and the scent of sweet cake. Marie wore her prettiest dress, the one her grandmother had sewn with loving fingers before she went to live with God in the bright and endless heaven. Each little stitch seemed to carry a memory of lullabies sung in the lamplight, of gentle hands brushing back Marie's curls. Today, that dress made her feel as though grandmother herself were near again, smiling from the soft blue sky above. On the table lay a festival of gifts, so many wonders that Marie hardly knew where to look first. There was a tiny kitchen with shining pans and spoons that clinked like silver music. There was a doll that could close her painted eyes and even say, "Ouch," when Marie mischievously pinched her round little stomach. And there was a picture book, a thick one, bound in red, with stories waiting to be discovered when Marie learned all the secrets of reading. "It's wonderful to be alive," said little Marie, her eyes wide as the morning. "Yes," said her godfather, who was sitting in the armchair by the window, smiling with a light that seemed to come from his very soul. "Life itself is the most beautiful of all fairy tales." In the next room, her brothers were listening. They were big boys, one 9, the other 11. And they too thought life was marvelous, though in their own proud, boyish way. To be alive, for them, was to have scuffed shoes and scraped knees, to run faster than the wind, to win snowball battles in the park, to collect bruises like medals. They loved getting good marks at school, building forts, reading about knights in armor, and bold explorers who vanished into unknown jungles. One of them, the younger, sighed and said that he feared by the time he was grown, there would be nothing left to explore, that men would have found every mountain peak and every secret river. Godfather laughed softly. "My dear boy," he said, "life itself is the great adventure. You need not travel to Africa to discover new worlds. Every heart, every day, holds its own wilderness. Above them, on the second floor, lived another branch of the family. Cousins, tall and self-assured, already far beyond the age of toys and storybooks. The eldest was 25 and soon to be married. The next, 20, dreamed of faraway cities and grand ideas. The youngest of the three, 17, played music that made the whole house hum. They were handsome, clever, and sure of themselves. "Look forward," they said. "The world is wide. The fences are falling. The future is ours to shape. Godfather is right. Life is the most wonderful fairy tale." Downstairs, father and mother listened to the laughter and smiled at each other. "How young they all are," said mother. "They believe the road ahead is smooth and shining." Father nodded. "Yes, but it is well that they do. The world has its storms and its thorns, but life goes on, and that, too, is a wonder." Then he added, almost to himself, "Life is a strange and beautiful adventure, one that always surprises us, even when we think we know the ending." Now, a little closer to heaven, up beneath the slanting roof, lived Godfather. He was old, yes, but youth glimmered in his smile. His room was like a small world in itself. Walls covered with pictures from far-off lands, shelves crowded with treasures gathered from the ends of the earth, seashells that whispered of distant oceans, fans painted with birds of paradise, a piece of coral as red as a dream, and coins that gleamed like captured moons. Even the windows were a marvel. Some panes were red, others golden, and when the sun shone through, the whole room turned into a cathedral of color. No matter how gray the day outside, through Godfather's glass, the world was always bright. A glass case in the corner held green plants, blooming even in winter, and beneath them swam goldfish with eyes like tiny suns. They glided silently, as if they knew ancient secrets too deep for words. A gentle scent of flowers lingered always in that room, and in the fireplace burned a fire that never seemed to die. "It refreshes old memories," said Godfather. And little Marie would stare into the flames, where she fancied she saw faces, castles, forests, and angels hidden in the red glow. By the great bookcase stood the Book of Books, the Bible. Godfather often read from it, and when he did, his voice softened as though he were speaking to someone unseen. He told Marie that all the world's stories were there. The birth of creation, the flood, the kings of old, and the King of Kings. All that has happened, and all that will happen, is written here, he said. So much wisdom within one book. Everything a soul needs to ask or hope for lies in the prayer of our Father. It is the pearl of comfort from God, the drop of mercy he lays upon every cradle. He placed his hand gently on Marie's hair. "Keep it close, little one," he whispered. "If you carry it in your heart, you will never walk alone. Even when the road turns dark, the light will still shine within you." His eyes shone then, like candles, reflected in water. Once, in his youth, those eyes had known tears. And that was good, too, he said quietly. For tears are the rain that makes the soul grow. There was a time when everything seemed dark and gray, when I could see no meaning in the world. But God sent light into the storm. Now I carry that sunshine with me. The older I grow, the clearer I see that He walks beside us always, through joy and sorrow alike, and that life, in His hands, becomes the most beautiful of all fairy tales. And so it will be, even beyond time. Little Marie looked up at him with a wonder that had no words. The fire crackled. The goldfish turned like living jewels, and from somewhere below came the laughter of her brothers. "Yes," she said softly, "it really is wonderful to be alive." And the others, her brothers, her parents, her cousins, even the grown-ups who often forgot to dream, said the same. But first of all, Godfather, who had traveled far and lived long, said it with the deepest truth. "Life," he murmured, with a smile that reached heaven, "is the most wonderful fairy tale of all." The Silver Shilling. There was once a shilling, which came forth from the mint springing and shouting, "Hurrah! Now I am going out into the wide world." And truly, it did go out into the wide world. The children held it with warm hands, the miser with a cold and convulsive grasp, and the old people turned it about, goodness knows how many times, while the young people soon allowed it to roll away from them. The shilling was made of silver. It contained very little copper, and considered itself quite out in the world when it had been circulated for a year in the country in which it had been coined. One day, it really did go out into the world, for it belonged to a gentleman who was about to travel in foreign lands. This gentleman was not aware that the shilling lay at the bottom of his purse when he started, till he one day found it between his fingers. "Why?" cried he. "Here is a shilling from home." Well, It must go on its travels with me now. And the shilling jumped and rattled for joy when it was put back again into the purse. Here it lay among a number of foreign companions who were always coming and going, one taking the place of another. But the shilling from home was always put back and had to remain in the purse, which was certainly a mark of distinction. Many weeks passed, during which the shilling had traveled a long distance in the purse, without in the least knowing where he was. He had found out that the other coins were French and Italian, and one coin said they were in this town, and another said they were in that. But the shilling was unable to make out or imagine what they meant. A man certainly cannot see much of the world if he is tied up in a bag, and this was really the shilling's fate. But one day, as he was lying in the purse, he noticed that it was not quite closed, and so he slipped near to the opening to have a little peep into society. He certainly had not the least idea of what would follow, but he was curious, and curiosity often brings its own punishment. In his eagerness, he came so near the edge of the purse that he slipped out into the pocket of the trousers. And when, in the evening, the purse was taken out, the shilling was left behind in the corner to which it had fallen. As the clothes were being carried into the hall, the shilling fell out on the floor, unheard and unnoticed by anyone. The next morning, the clothes were taken back to the room. The gentleman put them on and started on his journey again. But the shilling remained behind on the floor. After a time, it was found, and being considered a good coin, was placed with 3 other coins. Ah, thought the shilling, this is pleasant. I shall now see the world, become acquainted with other people, and learn other customs. Do you call that a shilling? Said someone the next moment. That is not a genuine coin of the country. It is false. It is good for nothing. Now begins the story as it was afterwards, related by the shilling himself. False, good for nothing, said he. That remark went through and through me like a dagger. I knew that I had a true ring, and that mine was a genuine stamp. These people must at all events be wrong, or they could not mean me. But yes, I was the one they called false and good for nothing. Then I must pay it away in the dark, said the man who had received me. So I was to be got rid of in the darkness, and be again insulted in broad daylight. False, good for nothing. Oh, I must contrive to get lost, thought I, and I trembled between the fingers of the people every time they tried to pass me off slyly as a coin of the country. Ah, unhappy shilling that I was. Of what use were my silver, my stamp, and my real value here, where all these qualities were worthless? In the eyes of the world, a man is valued just according to the opinion formed of him. It must be a shocking thing to have a guilty conscience and to be sneaking about on account of wicked deeds. As for me, innocent as I was, I could not help shuddering before their eyes whenever they brought me out, for I knew I should be thrown back again up the table as a false pretender. At length, I was paid away to a poor old woman who received me as wages for a hard day's work. But she could not again get rid of me. No one would take me. I was to the woman a most unlucky shilling. "I am positively obliged to pass this shilling to somebody," said she. "I cannot, with the best intentions, lay by a bad shilling. The rich baker shall have it. He can bear the loss better than I can. But after all, it is not a right thing to do." "Ah," sighed I to myself, "am I also to be a burden on the conscience of this poor woman? Am I then, in my old days, so completely changed?" The woman offered me to the rich baker, but he knew the current money too well, and as soon as he received me, he threw me almost in the woman's face. She could get no bread for me, and I felt quite grieved to the heart that I should be cause of so much trouble to another, and be treated as a cast-off coin. I, who, in my young days, felt so joyful in the certainty of my own value, and knew so well that I bore a genuine stamp. I was as sorrowful now as a poor shilling can be when nobody will have him. The woman took me home again with her, and looking at me very earnestly, she said, "No, I will not try to deceive anyone with thee again. I will bore a hole through thee, that everyone may know that thou art a false and worthless thing. And yet, why should I do that? Very likely, thou art a lucky shilling. A thought has just struck me that it is so, and I believe it. Yes, I will make a hole in the shilling," said she, "and run a string through it, and then give it to my neighbor's little one to hang round her neck as a lucky shilling." So she drilled a hole through me. It is really not at all pleasant to have a hole bored through one, but we can submit to a great deal when it is done with a good intention. A string was drawn through the hole, and I became a kind of medal. They hung me round the neck of a little child, and the child laughed at me and kissed me, and I rested for one whole night on the warm, innocent breast of a child. In the morning, the child's mother took me between her fingers and had certain thoughts about me, which I very soon found out. First, she looked for a pair of scissors and cut the string. "Lucky shilling," said she. "Certainly, this is what I mean to try." Then she laid me in vinegar till I became quite green, and after that she filled up the hole with cement, rubbed me a little to brighten me up, and went out in the twilight hour to the lottery collector to buy herself a ticket with a shilling that should bring luck. How everything seemed to cause me trouble. The lottery collector pressed me so hard that I thought I should crack. I had been called false. I had been thrown away. That I knew. And there were many shillings and coins with inscriptions and stamps of all kinds lying about. I well knew how proud they were, so I avoided them from very shame. With the collector were several men who seemed to have a great deal to do, so I fell unnoticed into a chest among several other coins. Whether the lottery ticket gained a prize, I know not. But this I know, that in a very few days after, I was recognized as a bad shilling and laid aside. Everything that happened seemed always to add to my sorrow. Even if a man has a good character, it is of no use for him to deny what is said of him, for he is not considered an impartial judge of himself. A year passed, and in this way I had been changed from hand to hand, always abused, always looked at with displeasure, and trusted by no one. But I trusted in myself and had no confidence in the world. Yes, that was a very dark time. At length, one day, I was passed to a traveler, a foreigner, the very same who had brought me away from home. And he was simple and true-hearted enough to take me for current coin. But would he also attempt to pass me? And should I again hear the outcry, "False, good for nothing"? The traveler examined me attentively. "I took thee for good coin," said he. Then suddenly a smile spread all over his face. I have never seen such a smile on any other face as on his. "Now this is singular," said he. "It is a coin from my own country. A good, true shilling from home. Someone has bored a hole through it, and people have no doubt called it false. How curious that it should come into my hands. I will take it home with me to my own house." Joy thrilled through me when I heard this. I had been once more called a good, honest shilling, and I was to go back to my own home, where each and all would recognize me and know that I was made of good silver and bore a true, genuine stamp. I should have been glad in my joy to throw out sparks of fire, but it has never at any time been my nature to sparkle. Steel can do so, but not silver. I was wrapped up in fine, white paper, that I might not mix with the other coins and be lost. And on special occasions, when people from my own country happened to be present, I was brought forward and spoken of very kindly. They said I was very interesting, and it was really quite worthwhile to notice that those who are interesting have often not a single word to say for themselves. At length, I reached home. All my cares were at an end. Joy again overwhelmed me, For was I not good silver? And had I not a genuine stamp? I had no more insults or disappointments to endure, although indeed there was a hole through me, as if I were false. But suspicions are nothing when a man is really true, and everyone should persevere in acting honestly, for and will be made right in time. That is my firm belief, said the shilling.